Hey guys, tonight we're going to slide quietly into the heavy hush of a family dinner, the kind where clinking silverware sounds like thunder and someone clears their throat too often just to prove they're still alive. You're seated at the same old table, where the lighting hasn't changed in decades and the same casserole dish makes its haunted appearance. Nothing explosive happens, yet you leave feeling oddly bruised. Welcome to the soft warfare of family conflict. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly soothing knowing who's drifting off with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull out your chair, slowly. Across from you, someone reaches for the salt shaker with the same practiced indifference they've used since you were 10. There's food on the table, probably something beige and starchy, but no one's really hungry. You're not sure when this ritual stopped being about nourishment and started feeling like a test. Every family has their choreography. Who speaks first? Who never finishes their plate? Who sighs audibly during grace? The roles are as set as stage directions, and you know yours by heart. The quiet one, the peacekeeper, the deflector. Tonight, you notice the same jokes being retold, the same awkward pause when certain names come up. Someone laughs a little too loudly. Someone else stares into their mashed potatoes like it's a portal to a better timeline. You try to catch someone's eye across the table. They glance back, but it's brief, like a passing car in the fog. This is the kind of evening that begins polite and ends with someone offering to help with dishes in a way that clearly means, I'm escaping now. No one ever says what they're really thinking, because doing that might set something loose. A conversation you can't rewind, a truth you can't unhear. Historians still argue whether early households, particularly in tight medieval communities, had greater harmony due to shared survival or just perfected the art of emotional suppression. There's no medieval therapist journal to quote from, but it's fair to say that the concept of feelings wasn't exactly trending during the Black Plague. You butter your bread slowly. Someone brings up a cousin's wedding, and suddenly half the table goes silent. There it is, that name, that event, that subtle fracture. You pretend to be deeply interested in your glass of water, tilting it like it might reveal answers. One person clears their throat, another excuses themselves to check on the dog, even though the dog is probably asleep and dreaming of a family that communicates. Oddly, this dance is universal. From dynastic Chinese households to Roman villas, family tension has always had its seat at the table. In ancient Egypt, the letters of Hekanacht, real papyrus documents, reveal a landowner micromanaging his family with a tone that would put modern passive-aggressive texts to shame. Even back then, it turns out, people were upset about who did or didn't water the crops on time. There's a weight in the air tonight that's heavier than usual. No one says it, but you all feel it, like a storm cloud that forgot how to rain. And because no one wants to be the one to start something, you collectively agree to suffer in dignified silence. Emotional Cold Wars make the best leftovers. As you pass the peas, you're aware of how carefully you choose your words. This is nice instead of, I feel out of place. How's work instead of, why don't we talk like we used to? Every sentence is a diplomatic mission, and you're an ambassador to a country that no longer issues passports. The thing about these dinners is they look normal from the outside. If someone dropped in, they'd see a nice family sharing a meal. But you know better. You know that what's not said tonight will echo long after the dishes are done, long after the leftovers have turned questionable in the fridge. Later, as you lie in bed and replay every moment, you'll wonder if you imagined it, if maybe the tension was just your own internal static. But deep down, you know better. You know the table holds memories like tree rings, every awkward silence, every swallowed word, every forced smile fossilized in its grain. That's the strange ache of family conflict. It rarely explodes, it simmers. It doesn't end with shouting, it ends with someone quietly avoiding eye contact, someone forgetting to say goodbye, and somehow, those are the moments that leave the biggest mark. You wake up the next morning with a strange, emotional hangover. Nothing dramatic happened, no one flipped a table or stormed out, but you feel drained, as if you ran a marathon in emotional tightrope walking. That's what living within a family's unspoken script feels like. You're an actor in a long-running play that no one remembers auditioning for. This invisible script writes itself early. From the moment you could walk and form opinions about broccoli, you were slotted into a role. Maybe you were the achiever, the troublemaker, or the one who doesn't talk back. Each label casually handed out like name tags at a conference you didn't sign up for. These roles aren't necessarily malicious, they're just convenient, predictable, comforting for others, even when suffocating for you. Historians still argue whether early domestic roles in ancient societies were assigned by necessity or by superstition. In traditional Yoruba households, for instance, birth order could determine not just chores, but one's perceived spiritual temperament. Firstborns were said to be more responsible, lastborns more mischievous. Sound familiar? By the time you're old enough to question it, the script is cemented. You know exactly how your father will react to bad news, what your sister will say when someone brings up mom's cooking, and which jokes are guaranteed to ignite side eyes. And because change is terrifying for families, even good change, you often find yourself reverting to that old role the moment you walk through the front door. Even after years away, even after therapy, even after gaining the clarity of adult friendships and solo grocery shopping, you return home and find yourself speaking with a voice you thought you'd outgrown. You laugh too hard at dad's recycled jokes. You apologize for taking too long in the bathroom. You make yourself small in rooms where you now pay the bills. It's not that your family doesn't know you've changed. It's just that change isn't part of the script. When someone says you've always been like this, it's not always a compliment. Sometimes it's a nudge to get back in character. Ancient Roman philosopher Seneca once wrote about the dangers of habitual living, where people lose themselves in roles they never examine. He was likely talking about citizens of the empire, but the metaphor extends perfectly to your living room. Habitual roles keep the peace on the surface. Underneath, they quietly ferment unmet needs, unspoken grievances, and all the things people avoid because that's just how things are.
Let's not forget the rehearsal time. Families don't start this way overnight. They rehearse dysfunction like an orchestra fine-tuning every sour note. If someone always volunteers to mediate, someone else will always bring the drama. If one person is loud, another will naturally shrink. These dynamics are like old furniture. You get used to the discomfort because it fits the shape of the room. But here's the twist. Sometimes the roles weren't even your idea. They were written for someone else, someone your parents wanted you to be, someone your culture said you should become. You inherited not just your family name, but the emotional architecture of generations before you. You may be acting out a script that was written before you were born. In Japanese Noh theater, actors wear masks that represent fixed characters, heroes, villains, tricksters. Once the mask is on, the role is clear. There's no improvising. You might not wear an actual mask around your family, but the effect is oddly similar. You become the version of yourself they expect to see, not the one you've spent years becoming. Of course, every now and then, someone tries to rewrite the script. They speak out. They stop laughing on cue. They leave the group chat. When this happens, the whole family feels it, like a record skipping mid-song. There's a sense of betrayal, but no one can explain exactly why. All they know is you've gone off book. Maybe it starts small. You stop coming home every holiday. You answer questions with honesty instead of convenience. You set a boundary, gently, kindly, but firmly. The first time you do it, the air thickens. Someone gets quiet. Someone else changes the subject. And even if no one says it out loud, you hear the subtext. That's not your line. But here's the secret. Scripts only have power if everyone follows them. The moment you acknowledge that the role doesn't fit, the structure starts to wobble. It's uncomfortable, yes, awkward, definitely, but it's also the first step towards something more honest. Historians debate whether roles in early modern households were as rigid as we assume, or if individuals quietly found ways to rebel, especially women, whose diaries and letters often tell a different story from the official family narrative. Even centuries ago, people felt the tension between duty and authenticity. So tonight, as you lie in bed, replaying how you smiled when you didn't feel like it, how you said it's fine when it wasn't, ask yourself, whose lines are you still delivering? Whose approval are you still chasing? There's nothing inherently wrong with playing a part, but you deserve to know you can rewrite the ending. It's not always a thunderclap, this thing called resentment. Sometimes it starts with something so small, you barely register it.
A forgotten birthday message, a sarcastic comment that lingers just a beat too long, an offhand comparison to a sibling that lands like a pebble in your shoe. Nothing unbearable at first, but oh, how it grinds over time. You tell yourself it's fine. People forget things, people joke. You try to be rational. But rational doesn't always win against emotional muscle memory, especially when that muscle gets worked out every holiday, every phone call, every time you return to a house that smells like familiarity but feels like performance. Historians still argue whether emotional nuance existed in written form in early Mesopotamian tablets, or whether we're just projecting our own angst onto those cuneiform lines. Either way, someone back then was probably irritated that their brother didn't help with barley storage for the 5th season in a row. Your mind starts keeping score, even when your mouth doesn't. You remember that one time they didn't call when you were sick. The tone they used when they said, "Wow, you actually did it." The way they always managed to bring up your mistakes with the precision of a scalpel wrapped in a smile. It's not just what they say, it's how they say it, with just enough sugar to confuse your instincts, but not enough to hide the blade underneath. Tiny barbs tucked into casual remarks. Phrases like, "You've always been a little sensitive," or "Don't take it the wrong way." You hear those, and your whole chest tightens with the effort of swallowing a scream. These small stings are so easy to dismiss individually, like tiny paper cuts. But have you ever tried typing an email with paper cuts on every finger? That's what navigating long-standing family resentment feels like. Painful, even when no one else sees the damage. In traditional Polynesian societies, where oral memory and kinship dictated everything from leadership to land rights, even subtle interpersonal slights were stored like folklore, repeated across generations as part warning, part identity. Imagine a family reunion where someone casually retells your worst teenage moment as though it were a cherished myth. But you don't confront it. You joke it off. You vent to friends. You let it pass, again. You become so good at letting it pass, you start to wonder if maybe you're imagining things. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe it's all in your head. Spoiler, it's not. Tiny resentments often flourish in environments where direct communication is rare. You know, places where people say, "Oh, it's no big deal," while quietly rearranging the hierarchy of their affections. You grow up learning how to read subtext better than actual speech. A sigh means danger. A raised eyebrow means retreat. A too long silence means you've accidentally stepped on something sacred. The human brain is especially gifted at cataloging emotional slights. It doesn't always know what to do with joy or love. It lets those wash in and out like ocean waves. But pain? Pain it preserves like a library. Indexed. Labeled. Cross-referenced with soundtracks and seasonal smells. Maybe you remember one Christmas when your opinion was ignored completely during a family decision. Or that awkward dinner when someone mocked your job and no one defended you. You laughed along. You always do. But later, alone, you ran the scene back in your head, rewriting your lines in the dark like a playwright too timid to send the final draft. Historians debate whether long-term emotional repression contributed to the notorious tension among certain European royal families. Between all the powdered wigs and arranged marriages, some of those frosty glances in painted portraits may carry more than just painterly stiffness. Imagine holding a grudge for so long it ends up oil-painted into history. The thing about tiny resentments is that they don't always make noise. Sometimes they just rearrange your behavior. You stop sharing certain details about your life. You arrive late. You forget birthdays. You RSVP maybe and never follow up. You don't call as often. And when you do, it's all surface. Work's fine, weather's nice, traffic was bad. You might even start building new rituals, new families, friends who feel like home. Spaces where you don't have to explain your laugh, your tears, or your need to leave early. Places where emotional debts aren't racked up like credit you never agreed to take. Still, the old resentments remain, like background apps on your phone, draining battery, even when they're not visible. You're not petty, you're not bitter, you're just exhausted from the labor of pretending that none of it matters. And every once in a while someone says, "Why don't you come around more?" And you say, "Oh, just busy." Because saying, "I'm tired of pretending we're okay," would derail a relationship held together by habit, nostalgia, and a shared Netflix password. So instead, you nod, you bring wine to the next gathering, you avoid eye contact when that cousin jokes about your hair, your weight, your life choices. You stay quiet, but sometimes silence is the saddest scene. It's you, sometime between folding the laundry and dodging a call you didn't want to take. How eerily familiar this argument feels. Not the words themselves, but the rhythm of it. The way your jaw tightens before anyone even says something. The sense that whatever's coming next, you've already lived it. That's because you probably have. Family arguments, especially the recurring ones, aren't just emotional reruns. They're inherited scripts. You're not just replaying your fights, you're channeling generations of unresolved tension like an emotional heirloom nobody wanted but everyone keeps passing down. Historians still argue whether intergenerational trauma, particularly in post-war or colonized communities, has a measurable behavioral lineage, or if it's more about learned response. Either way, when your aunt starts a fight about who cleans up after dinner, and your uncle storms off like it's a referendum on his entire identity, you're not watching a one-time outburst, you're watching a sequel. And now you're in it too. You raise your voice, they raise theirs, you throw in that one sentence you always regret, the one that shifts the air. Maybe it's, "You never listen to me," or "Why do you always act like I'm the problem?" And then boom, there it is. The same spiral, the same wounds, different day, same bruising. But here's where it gets eerie. As you argue, you hear echoes of voices that don't belong to you. Maybe you sound like your mother when she was angry. Maybe your posture mirrors a grandfather you barely knew. The cadence of criticism, the structure of blame, it's all so familiar. In traditional indigenous Australian cultures, oral storytelling passed down not just knowledge but emotional tone. A story told with a certain cadence wasn't just a tale, it was a behavioral lesson. Now think about how many arguments in your family sound just like stories with assigned roles. The overreactor, the stonewaller, the martyr. You learned your lines early. The worst part, you sometimes know it's happening in real time. You're standing there, mid-disagreement, watching your own emotional movie unfold, unable to hit pause. You see the plot twist coming, the moment where someone sighs, walks out, or slams a door, and you do nothing to stop it. Because deep down, you're not sure what else would happen. What would you say if you weren't just quoting the family playbook? Even when you try to break the pattern, there's a gravitational pull. You lower your voice, try being vulnerable, only to be met with sarcasm or silence. Or worse, someone says, "Don't make this a big deal," and suddenly you're the unreasonable one for trying to change the channel.
You wonder how far back it goes. Did your parents argue like this? Your grandparents? Did your great-grandfather storm out of a wooden dining room in 1912 because someone questioned how he salted the soup? Probably. At some point, someone decided it was easier to yell than to explain, and everyone else followed suit. There's this myth that time heals family wounds, but time without introspection just preserves them in amber. You don't forget the arguments, you simply file them under things not to bring up, until one day they explode like forgotten fireworks in a hot garage. Sometimes you try talking it out. You initiate one of those calm, "can we just talk" moments. You sit down, maybe make tea, maybe dim the lights. You speak slowly, carefully, and for a moment, it seems to work. They nod, they say they understand, and then they pivot. Suddenly the conversation is about your tone, or their childhood, or how you don't appreciate them. You blink, and somehow you're apologizing again. You replay the conversation later and it hits you. The issue was never this fight. It's all the ones that came before it. All the ghosts crowding the room, whispering lines from arguments long buried. Historians debate whether ancient Spartan households, which emphasized silence and emotional control, were more peaceful or just more emotionally repressed. Considering they trained children to endure discomfort without reaction, odds are they'd be thrilled with your family's conflict style. You wonder, could the cycle be broken? Could you, yes, you, the slightly neurotic, overly introspective family satellite, be the one to rewire the emotional circuitry? Maybe, but not by winning an argument. That's the trap.
Family fights don't need winners, they need translators. People willing to say, I think what you meant to say is, you're hurt. Even when that hurt comes wrapped in defensiveness and jabs about your lifestyle.
Of course, being the translator means absorbing heat. You have to sit through the storm, offering calm even when your instinct screams to fight back. It's exhausting. It's thankless. And sometimes it doesn't even work. But other times, someone softens. Someone says, I didn't mean it like that. Someone listens. And in those rare moments, you see a crack of light through the dense forest of family dysfunction. A flicker of what it could be if everyone stopped reenacting pain and started speaking plainly. So tonight, as you lie in bed, still echoing with the sound of that last awkward conversation, ask yourself, do you want to win or do you want to change the story? Because it turns out those are rarely the same thing. You've probably heard it before, maybe in the voice of a parent, maybe in your own. I only want what's best for you. It's meant to sound like love. It is love, in a way. But sometimes it's love with a price tag. Love that comes with a contract, written in invisible ink. And the fine print? Be who I need you to be. That's how family love can slowly turn into pressure. You walk through life with this gentle weight pressing on your shoulders. It's not heavy enough to collapse you, but it's there. An expectation to call more, visit more, achieve more, settle down sooner. Smile, even when you're exhausted. The love is real, but so is the cost. Historians still argue whether Confucian family values in ancient China promoted harmony or quietly demanded conformity. Filial piety was seen as the ultimate virtue. Respecting your parents, even at the cost of personal desires. Sounds noble, right? But for every tale of harmony, there are whispers of silenced dreams and unspoken rebellion. Back in your life, it plays out more subtly. Maybe you're the first in your family to move far away, and every phone call includes a gentle, pointed, when are you coming home? Maybe you chose a career they don't understand, and they respond with polite silence. Maybe you're child-free by choice, and suddenly, your visits are punctuated by glances at other people's babies. No one's yelling, no one's angry, but the message is clear. There's a template, and you've wandered off the page. And you start to wonder, is love conditional if it hinges on your compliance? It's complicated, of course, because your family has their own history, their own fears. Maybe your mom pushes you toward marriage, not because she doubts your choices, but because she never got the chance to choose. Maybe your dad encourages stability because he grew up with none. Maybe their pressure is just their way of saying, don't suffer like I did. That doesn't make it easier to carry. Sometimes you want to scream, can you just love me without the suggestions? But you don't. You nod. You say you'll think about it. You change the subject to something neutral like the weather or a mutual dislike of airplane food. In ancient Hindu epics like the Mahabharata, family loyalty and obedience are prized virtues, but they often come at tremendous personal cost. Heroes are praised for sacrificing individual wants for the family's good, even when it leads to tragedy. It's noble and exhausting. Sound familiar? You find yourself tiptoeing emotionally, choosing how to dress, speak, even succeed based on what will keep the peace. If you get a promotion, you downplay it so your sibling doesn't feel overshadowed. If you're struggling, you fake stability because we don't air dirty laundry. Your wins become quieter, your needs whisper thin. This isn't always out of fear. Sometimes it's just habit. You've learned that harmony matters more than honesty in your family's emotional economy. So you keep things light. You keep things pleasant. You smile through the sighs, but deep down something aches. Because when love always comes with performance, you start to wonder if you're lovable without it. If you stop being the good one, or the funny one, or the strong one, would they still choose you? Maybe you've tested it, shown your messy parts, expressed a boundary, and maybe it didn't go well. Maybe the room went silent. Maybe someone called you dramatic or too emotional. And just like that, the pressure snaps right back into place. So you adjust. Again. You tell yourself you're lucky to have a family at all, especially when it comes to families. But gratitude doesn't erase your need to be seen, fully, honestly, without the costume. Historians debate whether pressure within traditional family systems was a stabilizer or a slow-burning source of trauma.
Was it the glue that kept societies together, or the thing that kept individuals from becoming themselves? Maybe both. Because love mixed with pressure creates something tricky. Loyalty that hurts. You defend them to your friends. You delete texts you almost send. You try, again and again, to meet expectations that were never clearly explained, but always clearly felt. You want to believe that love doesn't require shrinking, that being honest won't break the bond, that your parents, siblings, aunties, and uncles can hold space for the version of you that doesn't always agree, doesn't always visit, doesn't always say yes. And maybe, one day, they will. But until then, you keep showing up with a slightly edited version of yourself. A little more polite, a little less direct, a little shinier around the edges. You sit at the family table, pass the salt, and bite your tongue instead of saying, "I'm doing my best, even if it doesn't look like yours." Because the love is there, always, but so is the pressure.